All right, Keith, let's talk then about some of the fights that we saw on Saturday. Let's start with the main event, 154-pound title fight, Terence Crawford against Israil Madrimov. And I don't know what people expected coming into this fight. I know Madrimov was a big underdog, according to sports books, but this turned out to be a really competitive fight. You had Crawford struggling, I think, a little bit at times with the skill set of Madrimov. He ultimately made some great adjustments in this fight. He closed the show really well, which is what you want to see from a champion the caliber of Crawford. Give me your takeaways kind of from what you thought of Crawford and Madrimov.
In the times when we had discussed this fight on the podcast previously, Chris, I always felt that it would be a competitive fight. I didn't expect Madrimov to win, but he's a natural junior middleweight. Yeah, he's a little bit shorter than Terence Crawford. I thought they were around the same height, but when I saw them face to face, it looked like Crawford was slightly taller. But he's accustomed to fighting in that weight class. He knows what it's like to fight guys. Now, Crawford spars with a lot of guys that are heavier than him, and that's not something uncommon. But to be in the ring with smaller gloves on and no headgear and all that, it is a different deal. So I wasn't surprised that it was competitive, and I thought the judges, or two of the judges, got it right, in my opinion. I thought it was a 115, 113 type of fight for Terence Crawford. I thought he did enough to win, but he fought cautiously at times because he was in there with a bigger guy who could crack a little bit, and he had to get himself kind of accustomed to that weight class after fighting at welterweight for so long. So it was. I didn't expect him to knock Madrimov out. I expected him to win a unanimous decision, and that's what happened.
Yeah, to underscore how competitive the fight was, I want to throw some of the numbers at you. According to CompuBox, the two fighters were separated by four or less punches landed in 11 of the 12 rounds. Crawford held an edge in activity through 158 more punches. Madrimov, he held a pretty wide advantage in accuracy, 30% to 21%. Crawford's jab was his most effective weapon. He landed 21 more jabs than Madrimov, and Madrimov landed 10 more power shots. I thought this was anyone's fight, Keith, going into those championship rounds. And look, two of the three judges thought the exact same way. Two of those judges that had it 115, 113 had the fight at dead even going into the 11th round. And Crawford needed to sweep both of them to win. And like great fighters should do, he did exactly that. He won the last two rounds and came away with the win. Do you think people maybe just underestimated Madrimov because they didn't know enough about him? Like, he has only 11 fights into his pro career. He is a decorated amateur. He is a world champion. But I guess I was a little bit surprised. I guess people having seen, like, not to make an apples-to-apples comparison, but like Dimitri Bivol doing what he did to Canelo Alvarez, I wasn't surprised at all to see Madrimov have the kind of success he did on Saturday.
No, to your first point that you made earlier, Chris, you have to give Crawford credit because he did close the show, and that's how he won the fight. And he's an elite level fighter. I've considered him the best pound for pound fighter in the world for a long time. And he really did do what he needed to do in those closing rounds to win. But even in his corner, Brian McIntyre, his trainer, Bomac knew it was a close fight. He was urging him to fight a little differently and to make sure that he did what he did to win the fight. So they knew it was close. They knew it was competitive. Madrimov, he didn't surprise me, as I said, Chris, because I know you've called a lot of his fights. I've seen all of his fights. So I wasn't surprised that he was competitive, but he had never fought someone at Crawford's level because, well, there aren't too many people at Terence Crawford's level. So how could he have fought someone? We had to find out what he was really about at the top level on Saturday night as well. But we had all been impressed with him. The one thing that struck me, though, during fight week, Vadim Kornilov, who handles Madrimov's career, I like Vadim. This is not like an insult toward him or anything like that. But they were talking about the fact that they wanted to make sure that everything was on the up and up and that it was fair, which you would hope in any fight, no matter if you're fighting in your opponent's home country or whatever the case might be. You always want it to be fair. But I would say this. Was it fair when Israil Madrimov, or Madrimov, I guess is how it's pronounced, was it fair when he fought Michel Soro and hit him 14 times after the bell? And I'm not really exaggerating by all that much. I think he hit him 7 or 8 times after the bell, if I'm remembering correctly, in a fight that was very competitive. And yes, Michel Soro was hurt toward the end of that round and very well might have gotten knocked out in the next round. However, he hit him I've never seen a fighter hit an opponent that many times after the bell Now, they couldn't hear the bell, supposedly. They were in a small venue in some sort of hotel, which, by the way, was in the capital of Uzbekistan. Remember, Dreamov is from.
Mm.
He hits him that many times after the bell. He loses by technical knockout because he hit him so many times after the bell. The Uzbekistan Boxing Commission refused to change the outcome of the fight, despite that there was an overwhelming amount of evidence that he hit him so many times after the bell. Was that fair? So, I mean, don't come here and start questioning the fairness of this event. And if you're that concerned about it, Eddie Hearn is your promoter. Eddie, they could have made sure if they had a problem with any of the judge. I don't know what he was implying, but
Well, I,
it,
I can I can kind of weigh in a little on that
what
because
happened Wednesday, you're
well,
talking?
yeah, what happened Wednesday, really, just for people that weren't following, that press conference where Vadim said what he said happened on Thursday, a day before on the Santa Monica Pier, they had another show. And on that show was Shakram Giasov, a top contender
Mhm.
at 147. And Giasov in that fight looked like he won a pretty clear, pretty wide decision. One judge gave it to his opponent. Another judge had it by 1 round. And on top of that, the referee blew the call on a clear body shot, ruled it low. And on top of that, the California Commission didn't review it. And the California Commission has the authority to review stuff like that.
And so much like the Uzbekistan Boxing Commission failed miserably in the instance that I just detailed, so did the California Boxing Commission. And I understand Vadim's frustration with that and his criticism, but it's kind of hard to make that argument in a fight that involves a guy who won that Michelle Soro fight in the way that he did.
Mm.
The result of the fight was not changed. He won, and then Michelle Soro got his rematch and unfortunately got cut accidentally in the second round. It was ruled a technical decision. And I understand Eddie Hearn, is the promoter of the fight. You can't keep paying for that fight over and over again because circumstances beyond your control keep, resulting in technical decisions or controversies. I get that. But Michelle Soro was never really made whole from that whole situation. And his career has been impacted negatively from it. So if there's anyone here that should be complaining, it's Michelle Soro, not Madrimov, who made a career high payday on Saturday, and he fought well. He deserves a lot of credit. He fought well. He fought better than maybe some people who weren't as familiar with him as you, I, and a lot of other people expected him to fight. So he made the most of his opportunity, short of winning. But he made himself a lot of money last night too, Chris. And that the way he fought against arguably the best pound for pound fighter in the world, is going to earn him more paydays, and it should. So, there's a real player he was already held a title, of course, but there's a real player in the junior middleweight division now that didn't really exist before last night, despite that he owned the title, because now everyone is familiar. The people who weren't familiar with Israil Madrimov before last night are certainly familiar with him now based on the way that he performed against Crawford. He'll get another payday out of it as well. He should. And if Crawford doesn't want to fight Virgil Ortiz or some of the young guns in the 154-pound division, which he might not, then Madrimov is in position to fight those types of guys. And that only benefits boxing fans who want to see those types of fights.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Madrimov won in a loss. Like, he gained something from that. His side believed they did enough to win the fight. I don't think they did. I think it could have gone his way, but those last couple of rounds, I thought Crawford was the more active of the two fighters. I thought Madrimov could have let his hands go a little bit more, and that's the same thing that was coming from the corner during those later rounds. I remember walking into the corner to talk to Joel Diaz and ask him how he thought it was going, and he said, "Look, it's a chess match out there. One of these two guys is going to start to open it up, and I needed to be my guy," and it wasn't his guy. His guy didn't open up enough to sway the judges in the way they needed to sway him. He fought a good fight. That right hand, was there all night. It was a big shot for him, but I certainly don't look at this as any kind of robbery or anything needs to be reviewed. I thought it was a clean win for Terence Crawford. But we have to look at this through a broader prism, right, Keith? Because Terence Crawford has eyes on bigger prizes. He wants to move up in weight, or at least before this fight he did, to go challenge Canelo Alvarez at 168 pounds. The fighter you saw at 154, did he look, a lot different than the fighter you saw at 147 because yeah, he didn't get a knockout. First time in the last 12 fights that a Crawford win did not end in knockout. At the same time, he was fighting a really strong guy, a guy with an incredibly difficult style. Like the feinting of Madrimov was really impressive. Like he never gave Terence Crawford a stationary target. Like he is a highly skilled guy. But at this new weight, did you see a different version of Terence Crawford that might make you a little reluctant to endorse a move up to 168?
Well, to Madrimov's credit, as you said, Chris, he really made Terence Crawford think a lot in the ring last night, and that's a real compliment to him because Terence Crawford is the arguably the best thinker in the ring that we've seen in this generation. I mean, Floyd, of course, I don't know if they're the same generation; they fought at the same time, obviously, but in this era post Floyd, Terence Crawford is a highly, highly intelligent fighter in the ring, and Madrimov made him wonder what he was doing and made him a little cautious, or maybe a lot cautious. But to answer your question, though, I think what we saw last night was, for the most part, the reason why I never believed that Terence Crawford should be fighting Canelo Alvarez to begin with. He's not big enough. He's not. He fought, and I'm not. This is not a criticism. He had to be more careful last night against a career-long junior middleweight than he was in welterweight fights in which he was very comfortable, and junior welterweight fights in which he was very comfortable. He didn't look like the same fighter who, for all intents and purposes, ended Errol Spence's career a year ago because he had to be careful. He had to be more strategic against Madrimov because he would have risked getting, caught with a shot that he didn't see or maybe knocked out. Who knows? I mean, he knows that. And at the same time, I heard Terence on the interview you did with him that was on your podcast last week, and he's mentioned this at times before, but he was honest with you. He was like, "Look, I thought at 33 years old I would be done. He'll be 37 next month." So his body has held up in a way that most guys' bodies don't at this age because he leads a very clean life outside of the ring and he's very focused on training and he takes care of his body. So yeah, he might be able to perform at the highest level longer than most guys, but he's still going on 37 years old. So if I'm him, he's going to want to fight Canelo Alvarez because he's an extremely competitive person. If you tell Terence Crawford he can't do something, he's like, F you. He might tell you F you, even if you don't say that to him, the way he is sometimes, but as we well know, but he's going to want to do this to prove people wrong, to enhance what is already an extremely strong legacy, clearly a first ballot Hall of Famer. I mean, he's done so much. He's made a lot of money. Yes, he would make a lot more money for the Canelo Alvarez fight than he has made for any of his other fights, and rightfully so. But I just don't see it as the type of competitive fight that maybe some other people see it. And I think last night was some evidence as to why, because if he was really cautious and really careful against Israil Madrimov, which he had to be, how would he be against Canelo Alvarez, who is two weight classes higher, accustomed to taking punches from not only super middleweights, but light heavyweights and hasn't, but you're not knocking Canelo Alvarez out. So, and I'm not saying that Terence Crawford thinks that he will, but what are you doing with Canelo Alvarez that you couldn't do last night against a smaller guy who frankly is very, very good, but not even the 34-year-old version of Canelo Alvarez?
Yeah. While I don't think you can put or think of it in the way that you'd make a Israil Madrimov type of fighter 168 pounds, because Canelo and Madrimov fight very differently, of course.
Of course, yeah.
It would remind me, Keith, about a fight we're going to talk about in a couple of minutes, like Martin Bakole and Jared Anderson in a way, where you could see Terence Crawford landing some shots, getting some stuff off, but Canelo just kind of hunting, right? Like following around, cutting the ring off, waiting to land his big shots. And Canelo, even though he's not the guy he was, several years ago, he is still a massive puncher with incredible hand speed. And I just don't see a path to victory there after watching Terence Crawford fight this past weekend. I do think he'll still take it if the money's right, and it would probably be the last fight of his career because he's not going to go back down, I wouldn't think, to 154. But I do think it's, after watching him against Madrimov, I would have picked Canelo before the Madrimov fight. I'm feeling stronger in that conviction now.
Chris, I think maybe the most interesting thing related to whether Canelo-Crawford comes together is what is available to each of them that makes more sense or that would be easier to make. They're certainly not going to make more money for other fights. And I think the other fights that would be available for them for the most money are fights that they don't want. So they fight each other and they make a lot of money. And people, from a commercial standpoint, the fight will do very well. I just think in the ring, it's not going to be a great fight, and I don't see Terence Crawford having a real opportunity to win. And I wouldn't say that about Terence Crawford against virtually anyone else. I mean, but you're moving up so high in weight at a weight at which he doesn't belong. I think, that's the reason I'm saying that. But, I think he would have an opportunity to beat other junior middleweights. But at this point, if he did not want to fight Jaron Ennis at welterweight, which he literally, I saw him say it. He said that fight does nothing for me. I don't want that fight. I'm at the point in my career where I need to maximize my money and get out with my health intact, which is completely understandable and well within his right at this point of his career. But if he didn't want to fight Jaron Ennis, and I'm not saying he couldn't beat Jaron Ennis, but he said, I don't want it. If he didn't want that, why would he want to fight Virgil Ortiz if Virgil Ortiz is able to beat Bohacek on Saturday night, which is no foregone conclusion either. I would favor Virgil Ortiz to win, obviously, but Bohacek has been knocked out by Brandon Adams in a fight that he was winning and is a huge puncher himself. So that should be a fun fight to watch. But like, if Virgil Ortiz emerges from that fight as the winner and has a title, why would Terence Crawford fight him if he wasn't going to fight Jaron Ennis? And then, of course, if you get into a situation where you build a big event around Virgil Ortiz while he has gotten to the scales repeatedly now a few times after all of his problems, you never know what might happen with him in training. So you build a big pay-per-view event around him, and you kind of always have that in the back of your mind anyway. But I'm talking more about from fighting the young guns, especially a guy like Virgil Ortiz who can punch like that. He's probably an even bigger puncher. I'm not saying he's better than Jaron Ennis, but probably a bigger puncher than Jaron Ennis. So why would Crawford, and he's a bigger puncher than Madrimov. I don't think that's questionable, really. He's knocked out every opponent that he's fought. Hasn't fought high level guys at 154, as you well know, Chris. You were there for the fights he's had at 154, which have not been good. But so he's not going to want to fight him. He's probably not going to want to fight other young guys in the division that are certainly younger guys than him. I don't see him taking those down. Tim Tszyu, let's say Tim Tszyu gets himself back in the mix, and is he going to fight him? I don't know. I don't know. So the Canelo thing makes a lot of sense for him and for Canelo, because as we well know, Canelo has made it crystal clear, and whoever doesn't like it can F off, I guess, from his perspective. He's not fighting David Benavidez. That's the fight the whole boxing world wants to see. He's not doing it. So he says a lot of bizarre things, frankly, as to why he's not fighting him. He said the last thing that he said was that David Benavidez, based on the way that he looked against Alexander Vostok, did not deserve the fight. He showed that he's not ready for that type of fight. But then you went and made a fight with Edgar Berlanga? Like, come on. I mean, he's a great fighter, and he's been relatively pleasurable to deal with. He's been a professional. I don't have anything against Canelo, but he's just saying kooky things that are frankly insulting to people who know better. And no one wanted to see this Edgar Berlanga fight. It's not going to do well commercially. And then is he going to continue? Look what the last three fights for Canelo have been. He fought Jermell Charlo, which you crapped on from the very beginning, and you were 1,000% right. I had convinced myself that Jermell Charlo had at least some semblance of a chance to make the fight competitive. He didn't even try. So that's his fight last September 30th. Then he fights Munguia. Okay, I mean, it was a reasonably competitive fight. Munguia's a tough kid. He had built himself into that position. Not really the fight that people wanted to see, right? And now he fights Berlanga. So if he fights Berlanga when he fights Berlanga September 14th, and assuming he wins convincingly, and the fight doesn't do as well from a financial standpoint as they hope, and it probably won't. You have this UFC event across town that night. You're battling for pay-per-view dollars, and not the two fan bases always cross over, but it seems like a weird night to go with that fight, despite that it's the traditional night that Canelo usually fights. If he comes out of that fight dominating a guy that no one wanted to see him fight, and the fight fails from a financial standpoint, he pretty much has to fight Crawford if he won't fight. Who is he going to fight? I mean, who makes any sense for him to fight other than Crawford, despite that he has said that he doesn't want to fight Crawford because he's not going to get credit for it because Crawford is moving up so much in weight. Really, he's a welterweight, really. Okay, so he fought one time at junior middleweight. Where he has done his most noteworthy work was at 147 pounds, and he cleaned it out. 147 pounds, he's 168 pounds. It's a 21-pound difference. Are we asking Jesse Rodriguez to fight Tank Davis?
No, no, we're
Right?
not asking. Yeah.
So I know Crawford wants it. He's pushing it. It's not like someone's forcing him into it, but I mean, it's a comparable thing here. So it just doesn't make much sense to me. But some people are intrigued by it. It would do well somewhat financially. And I know the Saudis are interested in financing it if they can get back on the same page with Canelo, which who knows. But really, if he doesn't fight Crawford, who is Canelo going to fight after Berlanga? That makes any sense where he can make the kind of money that he's accustomed to making.
There's nobody. The depth at 160 or 168 is non-existent. There's nobody at 160 that's remotely interesting. If he's not going to go up and fight David Benavidez, there really isn't a marketable U.S.-based fight. And, you know, the Saudis are extremely interested. Turki Al-Sheikh has been giving multiple interviews where he said he wants to make Canelo against Crawford. He's willing to make a big offer for that fight to happen. So when this Berlanga fight is over with, you know, if that offer, and I think it will, if it comes to Canelo, I would imagine he's going to take it. I mean, look, we'll learn a lot in the next couple of days. Canelo's got his press tour with Edgar Berlanga on Monday and Tuesday in New York and LA, and he'll be asked repeatedly about what he thought about Terence Crawford and what he thought about potentially fighting him down the line. So we'll learn a lot about his kind of feelings on that more this week. But I think he takes it, Keith. I think he'll take the fight, and we're going to see Canelo-Crawford at some point in the first part of next year.